Welcome to Sanctuary, bringing you conversation and stories at the intersection of life and faith. This edition of Sanctuary is produced in cooperation with the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Nisan Chavkin, the Executive Director of the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago. For more than 2 decades, the Council has published an annual InterFaith calendar that lists and explains religious observances for 17 different faith communities. In addition to dates, the calendar features information about the basic beliefs, practices, religious writings, art, and demographics for each community. What celebrations and observances highlight the calendar of different faith communities? What do these observances tell us about our friends and our neighbors and colleagues? How do faith communities mark time? The 2021 Interfaith calendar is available for purchase later this year, and so you can get a look at what's going on. It features some beautiful art and information about each of these 17 communities, and here are some images that you can see, a preview of what you can find in the Interfaith calendar. Joining me today to discuss these and other questions are Dr. Daniel Olsen, Director of the Office of Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs for the Archdiocese of Chicago, and Mr. Abdullah Mitchell, Executive Director of the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. Now, because we are doing our part to protect each other and contain the pandemic, I will talk with each of our guests one at a time from across our set. Dan, welcome to Sanctuary. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you today, be with Abdullah, and discuss this very important topic. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. So I want to start really at the beginning of, or maybe a baseline question of, how does the church mark time? When's your calendar start? I mean, is it January 1? Or do you have multiple New Year's like the Jewish community does? I mean, what do you got? How's it work?
All right. There's various ways we can look at this, but let me start maybe at the biggest and then get down to the more narrow as we go. No, we do not start on January 1st. We begin with the first Sunday of Advent, which occurs 4 Sundays prior to Christmas. So usually early December is when our calendar begins. There are various liturgical seasons, and throughout the year we try to mark all of the mysteries of Christ's life. So each year is its own cycle, so to speak, beginning with Advent, continuing through that season of preparation, then Christmas where we celebrate Jesus' birth, always occurring on December 25th every year. That's one that most people would know. After that, there's a short Christmas season where we reflect on that birth and Jesus is coming into our world. Following that is another season which we call ordinary time, which isn't ordinary in the sense of not extraordinary, but ordered. And we mark the time from that moment until we begin Lent, which usually occurs in March.
So how does that work? Every week has its own number kind of thing?
Yes.
Cool.
Week 1 of Ordinary Time, week 2 of Ordinary Time,
week
3 of Ordinary Time.
And the ordinary is because it's ordinal, we're counting.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
And it goes all the way up until Lent. And whenever that occurs, because Easter moves, it's a movable feast depending upon lunar cycles and things we don't need to get into necessarily, but it's similar to the Jewish calendar.
Okay.
When Lent begins with Ash Wednesday, which is a day of repentance, asking for forgiveness, and that leads us into the season of Lent, which is a time of preparation, fasting, prayer, almsgiving. It's a very dedicated season for those in the Catholic and Christian tradition to prepare for Easter, which is really begun with a 3-day gathering, which we call the Paschal Triduum, beginning on Holy Thursday with the Last Supper, followed by Good Friday, where we mark the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and it ends with Easter, which is the biggest celebration of the Christian season of the Christian Holy Year. In Easter, we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, rising from the dead. There's a whole 50-day season then which would follow Easter, marking that resurrection and all that it means for us. Once Easter ends, we go back into ordinary time, and that leads us again to Advent, which ends the year. So for right now, we are in the midst of that ordinary time, which will end with Advent, which is the start of our year in early December.
Cool. So it sounds like basically a solar calendar.
Yes and no.
Kind of?
Yes.
No. Okay.
Well, certain feasts are based on the sun and the regular cycle. But then, like I said, Easter itself is a little aberration to that.
Right.
But normally, yes, certain days, feast days are marked like Christmas, and certain ones are movable like Easter.
Okay. So so it sounds like there's this starting in December, and then this great movement towards Easter. That's sort of the meat of the batting order, so to speak. Yeah.
Yes.
Not to any disrespect to other holidays, but
no, it is the highlight of the year, the Paschal Triduum, and the culminating in Easter.
Coming in Easter.
Now, there's also another way to look at how we celebrate mark time. It's in a weekly basis. Every week we have a celebration of Holy Mass on Sunday. So each week is its own particular cycle. I would also add throughout the year there are feast days that are outside of the seasonal system we talked about earlier. Feast of St. Francis of Assisi on October 4th. Certain Marian holidays or feasts that mark the time in a different way, where we remember particular saints. November 2nd, Feast of All Souls, where we pray for the dead in particular. So within the cycles that we have, there are certain days that are marked differently.
And those seem to be relatively fixed on the calendar.
Yes, they're usually. Now, they're movable in the sense if they occur on a Sunday, that feast is always moved or not recognized as such because that's the day of the Lord's celebration.
Okay.
So, anyway.
So we have this interior clock of the week.
Correct.
And it's set inside the larger clock of the year, so to speak. And those different, and some things have more priority than other things.
Correct. Yes, and I would also add, to drop it down one more level, each day has its own way of being marked.
Excellent. When does day start?
Days begin with evening. Sundown.
Sundown, okay.
So each day there's what's called the Liturgy of the Hours. Many priests, every priest is committed to praying the Liturgy of the Hours each day. All clerics are, many religious, and many others do as well. But there's a morning prayer, there's an evening prayer, there's a daytime prayer, office of the day. So there are 5 times a day that everyone is called to pray. And the sense is the church is always at prayer. Somewhere around the world, that it's morning somewhere or evening somewhere else, and the church is always at prayer. But that Liturgy of the Hours is like a daily backbone to the whole overall structure, I might argue.
Cool. So it's cycles within cycles within cycles and so on. And actually, so it sounds like Christmas actually starts Christmas Eve, the night before.
Yes, it does. And Sunday observance of Mass, for example, the first instance is often at sundown, 4, 5, 6 at night. Most parishes will have a Mass. And then they will
that's the Mass essentially for the next day.
Correct.
Or
it's
the start of calendar day, right?
Correct.
The next calendar day.
In terms of, yes.
Got it. Interesting. So as you know, the council is made up of all these different communities. The interfaith calendar reflects all these different festivals and observances. Is there what's useful for those of us who are not part of the Catholic tradition to really have a sense for or be appreciative of about our Catholic neighbors, to know that this is a special time for them?
I think it's a question of respect and understanding, not just with Catholics, but with others. What is the value in knowing that you don't set a scheduled meeting with a Catholic priest or a lay Catholic on Sunday morning? Much like with an observant Jew, you wouldn't try to plan something on Saturday morning or afternoon, or with the Muslim community on Fridays. There are certain awarenesses that we can bring, whether it's our workplace or other things that we're doing, to show respect for one another, and knowing on Christmas, Catholics and other Christians will probably be fairly busy, and that's a pretty obvious example. But having some of those more perhaps minor feast days and being aware, if you're fasting, maybe I'm not going to ask you out for a steak dinner on that Ash Wednesday, for example.
Right. Or Lent might be a poor choice.
Or Lent, when we're generally at fast, exactly.
And so there's fasting. There's also, I assume, feasting, and different traditions have lots of good things associated with different holidays. Is there a special thing one always eats at Pentecost, for instance, or is there? How's that? Or does that vary around?
It varies. It's in a lot of ways cultural. I would say certain Italian Americans might have a particular way of commemorating Christmas. Irish Americans around Feast of St. Patrick might have a particular way of celebrating, which we don't have to get into too much in detail. But there are many ways that we can celebrate different holidays by feasting that are more, I would say, tied to cultural traditions or family. My family, we always have a prime rib roast to celebrate Christmas, and we all gather to do that. So there are certain family holiday observances that we also do.
I have to ask, we're in the middle of this terrible pandemic. How is your family planning to gather for Christmas? Are you going to be able to do so?
My mom called me last week. I talk to them every week, and it came up, and we don't know. Right now, we assume that we will not be able to gather in the way that we have before. How we will do it, you can't really zoom a steak through.
It doesn't taste the same.
It doesn't taste the same,
No,
I
it
would
doesn't.
guess. So I don't know what we're going to do. It is a question, not just a presenting question for our parishes, but for family. It's always been our tradition to travel. They live in Wisconsin, and then to be with my wife's family for another part of that time. How we'll do that this year is really up in the air. But it's of concern, particularly to my mom and my dad, who so much look forward to these gatherings, as do I.
Yeah, it's just such an enormous emotional burden, I think, for all of us, anyone of faith trying, or anyone in the world today, but particularly for these special times where we normally get together with those we love and in a very intimate setting. Had the same problem at Passover at our house, so it was quite a challenge. Dan, I'd very much, just as a close here, to just think about, have you heard from within the community of people working with Zoom experiences that allow for some of these festivals to come in part, or are people pre-recording, or are they standing in some congregations, in their cars in the parking lot? How are we doing it? So
it's a combination of all of the above. Some people are more comfortable returning to a liturgical setting in person. Perhaps they're younger, more healthy, and that might be possible. Others are not either interested in that or able to do that. So we're offering a variety of different means that they can come together. The challenge with us is, as a Catholic community, we're very incarnational. We're very much in the lived experience. So that distancing is really challenging some of our practices and how we go about it and commune with one another.
Yeah, and Christmas, it's generally cold on December 25th. So
outdoor may not be optional.
May not quite work, but we'll work through, and hopefully our time will carry us through, and faith will see us home in that particular respect. And I wish you very joyous holidays as we're coming into this part of the calendar. And I want to thank you, Dan Olsen, for joining me today on Sanctuary, and we'll have more just after this break.
Metropolitan Chicago is one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world, and for more than a half-century, Sanctuary has reported and reflected on our faith-filled community. Sanctuary tells stories of faith from both inside our houses of worship to the streets and neighborhoods where faith is acted out every day with acts of kindness and concern. From food pantries to peace initiatives, from worship services to servicing the poor, Sanctuary has a proud history of reporting on the goodness that flows from our faith traditions. Watch Sanctuary every Sunday at 12 noon on the Live Well Network.
Welcome back to this edition of Sanctuary. We're talking today about the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago's InterFaith calendar and the more general topic of marking time in different religious communities. And I'm joined now by Abdullah Mitchell, who's the Executive Director of the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. Abdullah, it's good to see you again.
Good seeing you, Nisan.
We were talking with.
Here today.
I'm glad you're glad to be here.
Even though we're socially distanced.
I know it is nice actually to just be in the physical presence of another person who I haven't seen for months. It's very heartening. And
we're social beings. We need this.
We desperately do. So, talking about being social beings, and we were talking briefly before with Dan Olsen about the rhythms of the Catholic community through the day and through the week and through the year. How do we structure time? What's Muslim time look like? How does it? Is it a solar calendar? Do we start the year? Do we start the day? Where should we begin?
Well, it's a lunar calendar.
Lunar
We're
calendar.
on the lunar year.
Okay.
Let me,
And what does that mean for our listeners?
Okay,
who don't
for
know
our
what-
listeners, the
or
time is
viewers,
marked
sorry.
on the cycle of the moon.
Okay.
All right, from the new moon through the new moon.
Okay.
And that varies from 28, 29, 30 days, depending on the, its global position. It results that, in comparison to a solar calendar, it's about 11 days less every year. So we find ourselves moving, depending on which way you look at it, back or sooner every year, 3 months.
Okay.
11 days.
So the same holiday might take place in an entirely different season 10 or 20 years later, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. One of the, I can remember my first fast, and one of our religious practices is fasting in 1 month called Ramadan. And when I first embraced Islam, I started in September, and now it's gone through every month, and I'm on my second cycle now.
Got it.
But in answering your question about time, listening to Dan, I see a lot of symmetry between the two. When you first analyze it from an annual, like I said, is our day begins in the evening each day, and it ends at sunset. It's marked, and when I would say we have those 12 months, and each certain ones have more significance than others. Like our New Year begins, the month is called Muharram. It's considered a sacred month. Once again, in time for calling for us to reflect and give thanks to the Almighty. The other aspect I started seeing that, like I say, that's similar, the symmetry, not only looking at your day being starting at sunset, there's that symmetry when we start to look at even the week, where the most significant religious time for us is on Fridays. It's called Juma, where Juma in Arabic means to congregate, bringing the gathering. And so on Friday afternoons, there's a prayer service, and that is like a spiritual high point to once again have a moment to remind us of the presence of our Creator, to remind us of the importance of giving thanks, and remind us to take moments to worship Him. And going from a week, also from a daily aspect, it's marked, we too have 5 prayers that mark our day. The first prayer being marked at dawn, before sunset. The second one, right past the zenith of the day, which is called Asr, which is an afternoon prayer. Dhuhr, which is afternoon prayer. And then the late afternoon prayer called Asr. And that's the last prayer before the end of the day, because the prayer at the end of the day is called Maghrib. And then the first prayer is that nighttime prayer, which we call Isha. So there's 5, our days are marked by these 5 times where we're called to pray. And I think I would like to also share with our audience is, I think once again you see symmetry. The whole purpose of these demarcations of time are for us to step back and pause and express gratitude and thanks to our Creator. We can, in our daily lives, even with this COVID situation we're confronting, we can see we're all wrapped up in Zoom meetings, that the day gets past us. I mean, right now, it's hard to even remember what day it is, because it just seems like on continuum. But what does that is, to the extent that we honor these times when our Creator is asking us, stop cease what you're doing, come back, worship, express your gratitude. For if you express gratitude to your Creator will express gratitude and thanks to you. So I see that symmetry, and I think the symmetry of what I would want people to take from this is that these holidays and how we mark our year, how we mark our months, how we mark our days are really structured around calling each of us to worship our Creator, give thanks to our Creator. That I would see is probably, the most significance when we start talking about how the year informs or time informs our lives.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And so there are these. It sounds like there's a couple of particularly significant months. There's the Ramadan and Muharram was the other one. And are there major festivals regular through the calendar year? In Islam, there are two major holidays.
Okay.
One immediately follows Ramadan. Okay. Once again, when we start talking about the significance of this month, so not only are we bound by practices of worship during Ramadan, it's what's added to that is the fasting. Mm-hmm. During that month, we would fast from dawn through sunset. What also is customary for Muslims is to engage in extra prayers. It is common for congregational prayers to be held every night during the month of Ramadan. There's a special name for them they call Taraweeh prayers. These are beyond the 5 regular prayers. And during that time where you're reciting passages from the Quran, once again to serve us, to remind us of the message, and to keep us focused. Mm-hmm. So at the end of that month, after a month of denying yourself food, drink, engaged in all this extra worship, we have what's called the Eid al-Fitr. That is a holiday of celebration. Mm-hmm. And kind of how that's done, it is largely based on families, where families would come together. And
have you tried to celebrate Eid al-Fitr during this pandemic yet? Has that happened? and how did people do that?
Well, what we did, we had as challenging as it was, we had a virtual Eid celebration where we had a Zoom call and our children, we're already separated by distance. Some in California, got another son and daughter in Atlanta. But in essence, what we did, we took advantage of that, and we each had our own meals, but we took advantage of the camaraderie of being together. Mm-hmm. It was not merely the eating of the food, but just the fact that we could share and like I say, being social beings. Clearly, it's not the same as faith, but it was a step in
that's good.
So it was
a meaningful moment despite this terrible pandemic.
Yes. Yes.
That's great. That's great. So that's the first of these major holidays. When's the second one fall?
The next holiday, which is considered the more significant holiday, is Eid al-Adha. And that is in the last month of the Islamic year. And it coincides with and commemorates the sacrifice of the Prophet Abraham's willingness and submission to the will of God to sacrifice his son. Mm-hmm. And that submission, once again, is a message to each of us how we must subordinate ourselves to the will of God.
Okay. And when does that take place this year? Or has it taken place?
Well, let's say next year is going to be right around August 10th. This year was around the 19th, 20th. Okay. So like that 11 day cycle pushing it.
Right. If we're using the Gregorian calendar as our reference.
As our reference point.
So it turns out that this interfaith calendar is particularly useful for congregations, communities like yours, like mine, that the dates move, and even for the Christian community, because some of their dates move depending on the moon or depending on how they're calculating time, and it's very helpful to find out when things are important. Is there things, we're just talking here with our viewers,
yes,
that we should, if our Muslim neighbors are about and it's the Ramadan season, that particular month, are there things ways to express, just to say that we understand, or not to be too, to be respectful, I guess? Are there things we should, you can have a meeting there, right? You can still see your neighbors, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I mean, when you're, the dominant religion in our society is Christianity. So clearly there is times when you're called, even from a work environment, where work environment is set up Monday through Friday, where Friday is a significant religious holiday or a point for us. So it's called, I think, let me just echo the sentiments of Dan. It's about being sensitive.
Okay.
Recognizing that these are holy times or special times of worship for Muslims, and to recognize that, particularly, and this is one of the efforts that we have made as a community, is in public schools, to raise the sensitivity of the administration that you have children, because in essence the obligation to fast on a Muslim arrives once they reach puberty, ability to fast. So you have students in high school that are or junior high that are fasting, to have that sensitivity, make them aware, not forcing them to be in the lunchroom,
right.
Notwithstanding
during the fast
skills.
times.
During the fast time.
Got it.
And flipping that, when we say, also, I would say particularly during those holidays, there, in addition to reaching our family, there is an effort to reach out to our neighbors. And that is a time where more, I'd say, obligation on us to try to commune more with our interfaith partners at that time.
Good.
To share this experience with them.
Excellent. I want to thank you, Abdullah, for joining us. Abdullah Mitchell, the Executive Director of the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago, here on this edition of Sanctuary. And to remind our viewers that the 2021 Interfaith Calendar will be available from the Council of Religious Leaders for purchase later this month. For the first time, the Council also will make available an Interfaith Calendar app for your phone, either Android or iPhone, along with each print calendar. So to order a calendar or for more information, you can visit our website. On behalf of the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago, I'm Nisan Chavkin, and thank you for joining us today.